was the central idea of the ASEAN Plus mechanisms. ASEAN countries, in collaboration with other countries in the region, would collaboratively forge, ways of cooperation. Now, the current Albanese government, and even the previous governments, have in many ways, I think, said the right things when it comes to the ASEAN Plus mechanisms, that things like respect for ASEAN centrality, a willingness to collaborate within the ASEAN Regional Forum, the East Asia Summit, and so on. Now, the challenge, particularly in the Australia-Indonesia relationship, is the involvement and the creation of minilaterals that are, again, possibly focused on threat actors. And I say possibly because it's never been that explicit that, for example, AUKUS or the Quad arrangements are focused on China. So there's a high degree of discomfort in Jakarta about these two arrangements, even though President Prabowo, for example, says he understands why AUKUS and Quad arrangements exist. At its core, generally within the defense and foreign policy elite, folks are concerned about two things. Firstly, can these arrangements disrupt ASEAN's initiatives within the ASEAN Plus mechanism? And secondly, can they really achieve what they do in that? Can they really achieve the goal of, for example, ensuring that China plays by the norms and rules set by the ASEAN Plus mechanisms, which includes things like the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, which commits countries not to use force in order to resolve disputes. So the question is really there. Historically, Indonesia has never really had a serious concern about the U.S. line system. Back in the 90s, even Foreign Minister Ali Alatas mentioned, I think at one point, that the U.S.-Japan alliance was an anchor of regional stability. Now, that's a statement that has not been said again, I think, by any foreign minister. But the point is, there is deep appreciation that for the normative frameworks that ASEAN has advocated, there has to be some serious military power to back it up. You need to have a bad cop as well as a good cop, right? But again, the problem is there's uncertainty as to whether these kinds of arrangements could really work out.
Okay, so Gatra, Indonesia is courted by China, Russia, and BRICS partners. How should Australia differentiate itself to ensure Jakarta sees value in prioritizing Canberra?
So I think generally Australia does have a positive image within the defense and foreign policy ecosystem in Jakarta. Yes, China and Russia and many other countries are courting Indonesia. But if we were to imagine the nature of the relationships or in partnerships with these countries, Indonesia's relationship with the US, with Australia, is a lot deeper than its relationship with Russia. Yes, you are seeing a lot of new initiatives under President Prabowo and in the later years of President Jokowi. But if you were to imagine them as different sets of bars, for example, one is reaching, say, 70%, and the other one is still 30%. Now, with China, of course, the economic relationship is very deep, but the security relationship is still not as deep, and the people-to-people ties are still also quite limited and constrained. Australia's selling point and strength has always been in the normative power of education and capacity building. I think there's deep appreciation for the many trainings and exercises between the two countries of Jakarta. A lot of Indonesian soldiers have had their training in Australia, either through the Australian Defence Force Academy, Defence College, even ANU, for example. There's a lot of interest in training in some of the bases in Northern Australia. So that was one of the major important outputs that came out of the Defence Cooperation Agreement. So again, it's going back to, firstly, the educational opportunities that Australia can provide, as well as the capacity building opportunities that Australia can provide. And China and Russia are still, far, far, far behind Australia in that regard.
How was President Prabowo Subianto's inauguration received in Canberra? I mean, do Australian policymakers see his presidency as a fresh opportunity for defence ties or a potential challenge given his nationalist instincts and past controversies?
So I think generally policymakers, and these are the folks who are based in defence and the foreign policy systems, Prabowo is a known name to them, so they understand the many paradoxes of the individual, right, of his character. They appreciate the fact that Prabowo is a man who understands Australia well, who understands the West well. He is fluent in English, and some say that even when he gets angry, for example, his natural instinct is to yell in English rather than say in Indonesian. See, he grew up right in the UK and the US and so on. He had his training in the US. And as defense minister, he was very supportive of the defense relationship with Australia. The Defense Cooperation Agreement was signed when he was defense minister, and also outside of that, as evidently he has been very friendly towards. He has been very understanding towards Australia's policies. He has been willing to again recognize the importance of Quad and AUKUS. He has been willing to free the remaining members of the Bali Nine, so that was a major diplomatic coup for Australia. And again, when Prime Minister Albanese visited him in Jakarta just a few months ago, Prabowo went to his hotel. I mean, he wasn't just seen as a professional colleague. There were serious personal attempts to court each other, right? So I think generally the political elite, the foreign policy elite here is they understand that he could be a boon for Australian interests. Outside of that, though, there is also deep recognition that Prabowo does have authoritarian tendencies. He has past human rights abuses. He has a notorious temper. And throughout his campaigns in the past, he has advocated for fairly hardline nationalist policies. Now, the challenge, of course, is what happens when there's a flare-up in Indonesia that forces Australia to respond. You mentioned West Papua, for example, as an issue earlier on in your intro. If there were serious human rights abuses in West Papua that required Australia to respond, that would put the government in a very uncomfortable position, right? But for the most part, again, I think the policy leadership here understands that Prabowo is a man that can be worked with.
Turning on to other matters, cyber attacks, disinformation, and maritime insecurity are common concerns between Australia and Indonesia. How can cooperation in these areas be structured so it doesn't inadvertently undermine democratic norms in Indonesia?
Oh, that's a very good question. One of the key recommendations in our report is collaboration on combating hybrid threats, right?